Welcome, Diana Wu David, to Ordinary Visionaries. And the
Thank
first
you.
question we ask everyone on Ordinary Visionaries is, how are you an ordinary visionary?
I am an ordinary visionary because I help people navigate the future and help them disrupt themselves or disrupt their companies before they get disrupted by somebody else.
Somebody else or something else, right?
Absolutely. We've all had experience with that.
Well, it seems I don't know if disruption is faster than ever before, but I get a sense that it is, especially with AI these days. Everyone's talking about it every second. So,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
just in general, what are some of the biggest disruptors in companies right now? I mean, including AI or anything else that I don't have a clue about.
So some of the disruptors, I would say when I wrote FutureProof, which is reinventing work in an age of acceleration, it was about the idea that we have so much more change. And I would say that we look at it and we often think of tech or AI and everything's changing. My phone updates every 2 days.
Right.
But actually, there's a lot of other change. So, in terms of the bigger picture, people are living longer. So, we have a longer opportunity to witness many changes. And the changes
Hmm.
are in terms of business paradigms, it's in terms of technology. So, we'll witness so many more changes like that. But then it's also um, demographics. I mean, we're living long enough to see massively declining birth rates in some countries. We are living longer, so that's completely changing the nature of work and how we live. So a lot of change on multiple fronts. The things that companies are trying to figure out right now are all of those. They focus on the tech. Oh gosh, generative AI. How's that going to change how we work? And the cycles are faster. So I started out in the 90s, helping at PwC strategize around ERP systems. We could have this, 5-year build out of an XYZ system and have
What's ERP?
cost savings. Enterprise resource. God, I don't remember what P is. Basically, these giant tech systems that would,
Yeah.
automate your expenses and your processes. Oh, P is for process. There you go. um,
Right.
so that now doesn't happen. You have to be agile and you have to iterate a lot. So the biggest thing that companies think that they're dealing with is tech. But I think that one of the bigger things that they're dealing with is how they manage people and organize people um, to accommodate and take advantage of all this change.
So, what are some of these changes? I mean, I know a lot of changes came about during COVID. Here in the US, in big cities, big high rise office buildings were emptied out and people started to work from home. And then they
Yeah.
liked that so much, like I've been doing that for forever, 20 years in Boulder Creek. So people go, oh, it's nice to work from home. I can, my kitchen's close by. I can manage things better. I really don't need it, whatever. So those kinds of things. Well, what other kinds of changes are happening? I mean, I'm not in the corporate world. I'm not tuned into that like you are.
Well, I'm based in Hong Kong, so my view will be from Asia, and it is quite
Hmm.
different
Yeah.
um, from country to country. So, for instance, there was a huge baby boom during COVID when everybody worked from home in the US because they
Yeah.
didn't have to commute and they were all less stressed and at home. In Hong Kong, it had the reverse effect because people are in tiny apartments with 3 generations and they couldn't, wait to get back into the office. So,
Ah.
um, but either way you cut it, I think that there is a generation of people, Gen Z coming up, um, who are redefining their relationship with work. And COVID accelerated that. So I wrote my book in 2019, and it
Hmm.
really was about the future of work, things going more virtual, having more in different jobs that you did, having in some cases portfolios of work to mitigate against financial precarity and instability. So that I think is remote work is a piece of that, and it's a really important piece that everybody's trying to figure out. But other aspects are really and truly in companies, they're trying to figure out what kind of skills do we need when things are changing all the time. We can't hire somebody for a job and then expect them to do the same job over 40 years. It's just not possible. Companies
Right.
themselves aren't even lasting for 40 years. They're the S&P 500, it used to be that they would be there for 60 years, and now the average lifespan of a company is 12. So as
Is it
leaders,
really? So does the company die, or is it absorbed by a bigger company, or
or it falls off the S&P 500. So, maybe it
yeah.
just the M&A, I think, is one aspect of it where, the bigger companies are getting bigger and smaller companies are not, and also maybe privatizing. So you have a lot of companies that are struggling for their own survival and to figure out how to perpetually pivot and metabolize the latest technology. So
Yeah.
the latest article I wrote was actually about this, and we interviewed people all over the world with my think tank, Future Work Forum. And one of the things we found is companies have so much tech change that they're trying to figure out how do we implement? How do we implement? There's a new thing coming down the pike. And it could be sensors, it could be quantum, it could be generative AI or AI more broadly, or it's the metaverse. And it's like, do we pay attention to the metaverse? Do we not?
I hope
Um,
not.
so, or
Yeah.
Web3, blockchain, there's a lot of stuff going on that could be existential. I happen to think that AI and generative AI is a huge one. But they need to have a culture and processes and people approach and leadership approach that's really about, okay, how do we perpetually navigate change? And so being able to focus on customer problems, let's not focus on the tech, let's figure out and get really close to our customers, and then have a process to review, kind of scan the horizon, review what interesting new technology applies to these problems, and then figure out how to test those, involve people in the company to explore some of that, and then scale when we think that those things merit that. So for generative AI, I just did a CIO roundtable, and there's a lot of little pockets of experimentation, for instance, in big companies. But there's very few who have started putting in generative AI across the business to really make it, a leading part of what they're doing. They're still experimenting.
Well, it's not a simple thing, it would seem to me. I mean, the whole idea is to make things faster and more efficient and et cetera, et cetera. I use ChatGPT almost every day for stuff just as a thinking tool. I love it, but
Yeah.
I don't know how companies are using it. Something that I notice, I get a lot of email from companies that I do business with, as a customer. Everybody wants to know, how are you happy with our service? I get endless numbers of surveys to the point that it drives me a little crazy. And, I don't know how they're using those for feedback, but for instance, if you have a company where you need tech support, then the tech support person knows they're going to be evaluated immediately. And I suppose
Mhm.
this is good for the company in a way. It sort of keeps you on your toes. It means, you got to be good and responsive. And what are the kinds of things and I don't know if that's even related to AI. That's just a system that you build into your, when this happens, then that happens, then this goes out and that goes here. I don't know.
Yeah. So one of the things that people are grappling with right now that is going to provide the foundation for what's to come is the data part. So I'm not a
Yeah.
tech person, but I'm a futurist um, and a strategist and somebody who spent 30 years in corporate innovation. So often when I work with companies, they are trying to figure out how to strategize, how to be more strategic.
Yeah.
I was just with a fintech yesterday, and they have it's about the people and the processes that they can put in to perpetually innovate. And some of that is
Hmm.
about, you sort of talked about different things that companies are doing. Right now, a lot of it is the data. So the really big companies are going, oh, we still have customers that are faxing us information and all the data is unstructured. And I mean, we're not talking small companies, we're talking, gigantic multi-billion dollar companies. So they're
Sure.
thinking about that foundational layer. But then there is this aspect where if you want to innovate, if you want for people to in your company to be adopting and looking for ways to adopt, then actually that's the biggest barrier. So you can have a handful of people in the tech department who are going, okay, data structure, but how are you going to get the salesperson whose biggest customer wants to fax them to not fax them? Right? Like that's where all these genius ideas fall down. And so that's where I'm
Yeah.
kind of intrigued because I love people and I love innovation. And so that, for instance, I'll give you a statistic. A survey went out in the UK where people were saying, generally, we think generative AI is going to be amazing for a company, but 94% were really optimistic about that. But 15% knew what their company was doing with it and trusted their managers to bring them in to, the excitement of it. And so I think that right now is the gap that we're seeing right now, where a lot of the CIOs and CTOs are having to change their behavior to say, okay, how can I kind of co-create this with people? How can I both think about the big strategy top down that I need to do, but also have people in the business saying, how can I figure out how to use it, and how can I then have that bubble up to the people who are making the bigger company wide decisions.
Right.
And then, of course, guardrails. How can we actually have good security, IT security, as we go forward with all of that?
Well, and how can you use AI in a way that it doesn't irritate the hell out of people? So I go online to get some technical help, and you can't reach people by phone like you used to be able to in many
Hmm.
cases. So what you do is often there's a chatbot, and that's an AI-driven chatbot. So they have a lot of data about their particular service that they've loaded into it, and God knows how they use this technology. But, sometimes it's pretty good. You put in a question and then it answers kind of like a person. But
Yeah.
it's not perfect. But if you can't get an answer, then you can say, I need to chat to a real person. Then it could shuffle them off to that. So that can save ridiculous amounts of manpower and actually can be faster. So uh, I'm my head is kind of bursting with the kind of things that are happening, and how will that affect the customer experience? Because, another thing, I tried to reach a doctor, my medical office, and it says, you're 14th in line. An hour later, I was 12th in line. So they need some AI. They need something to be able to set up appointments and stuff, because it's basically we're inaccessible and we don't care.
Yeah. Well,
So,
that's the danger really is, by putting these things in without really thinking about the customer first.
right.
I've been doing this since the 90s when most of my clients, when I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, were coming to us going, should we have a website? So, we've been doing this a long time. And I think that, in
Yeah.
your example of the doctor, people are going, oh, we need a chatbot. But they're not going, okay, what are our customer pain points? What are the things that are most important to them? and what is the customer journey, and how can we make it better, as opposed to just starting with the tech and saying, oh, we need some tech.
Yeah.
But one of the things you said is
Oh,
really important,
yeah.
which is, and it is really the crux of, my vision. And that is that I help people navigate the future. And I do that because people, excuse me, are anxious. People have not been in a position or educated to deal with that kind of change, or to be thinking, we basically go to work. We went to school. We got the grades that our parents told us to, if we're lucky to be supported like that. And
Right.
we go out and we kind of promise this linear thing, like just do your work. And, if you're particularly ambitious, you'll get ahead. And if you're not, you can still have a job. And there's a path. And now I think everybody's grappling with, there's a 10,000 paths. And actually, there's a lot of fear and anxiety around this idea of what's happening in the future, and around our careers in particular. And so being able to start having a process to, as individuals as well, scan the horizon, be thinking about where things are going, ground in values and purpose, be able to craft a narrative about the value you provide that is in line with your purpose, and then a network of people. Networks are by definition more resilient, right? So as people, if we have not just one company and one path, but a network of people that we can call upon when we need to pivot, or we lose one job, or we, have a crisis, etc. I think that those, to me, are the fundamentals of how we navigate the future in a way that kind of allows us to be more calm in the present.
So let's get into those in a little more depth. In your book, FutureProof, you kind of have a basic blueprint of the things that people need to work on. I mean, all those things you just gave me are big things, So it's like, where do you start with this? So I'm an employee, or I'm a business owner. I want to look into the future. The future, according to the news, I'm just thinking about AI because we hear about AI in the news every day.
Yeah.
And it's going to be wonderful or it's going to be a disaster. In 20 years, there'll be one big machine and everybody on the dole. I can't believe that will happen, but I don't know. Who knows what it's going to be like? But, and I know you really can't predict that kind of thing, but so where does the individual or a business owner start to start future-proofing themselves? What's the first step?
So the oftentimes the first step is that tools related to strategic foresight. The first step is scanning the horizon. So actually, for companies, the first step I do is, what is business as usual? Like, what's going to happen? Where is your business now? What's going to happen if you do nothing? Right? Like, if I just keep doing what I'm doing, I will likely grow incrementally. If I'm your usual human, you're thinking whatever the future is predicated on the past, right? If you're in a big company, it's like, okay, I guess I'll tell my boss it's going to be 5% growth because, they won't take anything less. And if I put 10%, then I'm really, putting in a rod from my back, or whatever it is. So even those people who are in startups where it's exponential growth, like, it's all predicated on whatever's happening today and a little bit better. So we do that, and then we look at what that might be if it was predictable results. And then if you ask in a team, oftentimes they'll say, I'm not sure if I'm really satisfied with that. And then we sort of look at what, instead of linear growth, what if you just took that elevator up, to a completely different trajectory, and started to think about what does that look like? What does the future look like if you really imagine a bigger, bolder vision? And we take teams, or sometimes I take individuals through what does that look like? What really excites you? And then we reverse engineer back from that to say,
Mm.
okay, oftentimes if let's say you're a business owner and you go, okay, like I do online training, and you go, okay, I could just keep churning out courses, but actually taking the time to go, okay, in 10 years with generative AI, maybe, the way that people learn is they have a GPT of me and they're just walking down the street with their earbud and we have a conversation, and the conversation is, I want to learn more about marketing. And my avatar says, oh, great, Robert. So what are some of your biggest problems? And, I don't have to, like, you can imagine that. And then if that's something that excites you or your team, or you think
Right.
it's a really big bet, we start to reverse engineer. So what has to be possible for that to occur in your business? And it allows people to go into this sort of breakthrough mindset of, wow, I could be doing something really big. Or it often allows people to get out of their silos in a bigger company where marketing's just like they're so busy doing business as usual, or in a finance, it's like, I just have to do KYC and there's too many customers and I just have to do it. And they can't get out of their, kind of
Right.
off their treadmill and go to something bigger. So that's the biggest thing. That's the sort of big futures thinking. And frankly, it's something I did strategy and innovation my whole life. And it's something in the last 8 years that I have been invested a lot in. And I bring it to my clients and I bring it to my FutureProof community, which are individuals designing what's next. And I think it's a real game changer. So that's the foundation of it.
Now, could you give me an example of a company you worked with, or some kind of a model of
Mm.
when a company starts to look bigger? I mean, what was there before, and what do they see as a possible future a few years down the road?
So a great example is the National Basketball Association in Asia.
Oh, okay.
The NBA, in particular, because of COVID, had a lot. They had so many different programs and obviously events, but nobody could go into the arenas, and so they realized that they needed to pivot, but not just to deal with COVID. It was more like, hey, you know what? Our entire business is predicated on us being live and in person. So, and if that's disrupted, we have an issue. But more importantly, maybe we could actually rethink this business to think about how we might scale beyond having to be in person. So they, for instance, had youth programs all across Asia that they pioneered that were predicated on getting kids into basketball by getting them on the court. So we talked about what was possible. Their CEO was really interested in rethinking what was possible for them. We put together a group of people, some of the key leaders, but also people who volunteered within the organization who were just interested. We talked about this idea of where they could go using Web3, using video games and blockchain-based games where people could even earn money through Web3 games
Wow.
playing basketball online. So
Hmm.
we had this group and they were looking out at all the possibilities. So they had a signals group, which means that you look for interesting new companies that are bubbling up, that are kind of like signals of the future. You think that in a couple of years, these might materially disrupt your business or augment your business if you take advantage of them. And then every month they would come together and say, okay, what did you find? Here are my 3 things I found. So one of them might be Axie Infinity is a game company where a bunch of people in emerging markets are playing games and earning tokens that they can actually use as their salary. So in fact, people were leaving their regular jobs because they earned more money playing video games. So that would be a signal where they go, oh, that's
That's
interesting,
crazy.
right? So,
Yes.
um, so they might talk about that, and then they would say, for our business, what does that mean? And is there a small experiment we might design to test whether or not, that could be applied in our business? Or the NBA Global did NFTs, for instance, in this Top Shot. And they allowed people to have, instead of like a baseball card collectible, blockchain-based videos of the best moments in basketball. So those are the things that we instilled. And then they had a planning process coming up. And they decided, rather than just doing the regular, like in 5 years, we're going to grow this and COVID's going to be over. So we're just going to go back. We'll build back up, even though it's been slow. They were like, no, we're rethinking the way that we do business. We are going to, make some bold bets around Web3. And when we get to 5 years from now, we're going to have, multi-million-dollar business. We're going to take our youth business in a different direction. We'll still have people getting onto the courts, but we're going to scale to countries we couldn't even reach before because we can do it via Web3 in this new video game initiative. And so that's an example of really just changing the mindset to be able to change the way that you approach the business.
So for the average person working for that company, how are they involved with being on the team to change the future?
Well, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that first, top leaders don't realize how much expertise is in their organization.
Yeah.
So when I've done this with, for instance, a fashion brand out here, they were interested in Web3 and the metaverse. And what they found is that there are a lot of people within your organization that are already experimenting, but they're not doing it at work. I mean, some of them are doing it at work, or that, like for ChatGPT, there was, in the early days, a lot of companies said, no, you can't use it. So employees were like, okay, great. I'm going to take my document and go home and, do it in ChatGPT on my personal email or my personal computer, and then bring it into work, since it's not allowed for me to do it on my work computer or whatever. So, what companies find is that there's so much expertise because people are interested and excited about this new technology. So being able to first put a call out to say, hey, for people who have a passion and expertise around this, we're forming a group. Raise your hand, put your hat in the ring. And people at all levels come out of the woodwork to say, oh, that's really interesting. I'd really like to do that. And I think that is a huge thing. So from an individual perspective, being able to say to your boss, put me on the team if there's any new initiatives, is important. And in the research that we did for the advanced tech, it is having processes to invite a wider group of people that want to be involved in co-creating innovation in the company to do that. And that could be hackathons, that could be the signals groups.
Hackathons.
It could be, people are still doing hackathons. For generative AI, like they had in one huge company here, they did a generative AI hackathon to come up with, I think, 200 new ideas, how to use it in the company. And then the top 3 are like game changers. So,
wow. Yeah, so putting your heads together in a different way and that's interesting, really is. Because, as an independent professional, I don't have much connection with that. I mean, you've got a big company. I think of it as monolithic and kind of not, the top bosses have got the strategy. They're pushing things down. But this sort of turns the tables and gets people to say, how can you how can you contribute to this? How can we tap into your creativity? That's interesting.
It's hard for companies to change to be that way, but it is increasingly important because we're not dealing with, complex problems where you can have an org chart where everybody goes in their box. You
Yeah,
have, you know, chaos. Mostly, it feels like most days.
right,
Um,
right.
but it's exciting too and interesting. So as somebody who runs a community and also is an independent professional, um, I think that it's still a game changer, and figuring out where you want to put your time and energy in terms of onboarding tech is also a question. So I have somebody in the Philippines, and we just did a podcast for small business owners to say, like, look, here's how we're working with generative AI, and here's how we keep up, because it changes all the time. So how do you feed it into how you do your work on an ongoing basis, and kind of keeping up with the latest LLM so that you're not using, Chat GPT-3 when Claude is now better for your newsletter writing, or we do monthly video expert chats, and we have now saved 3 hours every single time for those because we have it summarized via AI instead of me looking through the video, her trying to get the little clips, me writing the replay takeaways. Now we summarize it and then we edit it.
Are you finding that, well, with AI, ChatGTP, et cetera, I got ChatGTP 4.0, and I've been developing graphics with it as well. It's astonishing. You just type it right in and say, I'd like a picture that shows this. 30 seconds later, you have something really good. Things like that. So one of the concerns of the future of AI is it will take jobs away, but I see that it will make people more efficient and simply enable them to do more. And,
Yeah.
it's enabled me to do more, do more planning. I come up with an idea for a plan. Instead of hunkering down for 5 hours, I put in a few prompts and I have a great plan that I can start to work from in just a few minutes. So,
Yeah.
and then I'm at my leisure, I can start to put it all together and work on it instead of, I don't know. It just seems an extension of the computer in a way. I mean, if I hadn't had a computer when I started my business, I got my first computer in 1986. I don't know what I would have done, but I learned desktop publishing. I created a database. I started to do mailings. I mean, everything as a one-person business that I could do. So it's I don't know, but it seems to me it's just leveraging your creativity to enable you to generate God knows what.
Yeah. There is research now that just came out of Columbia Business School that companies that are investing in more in AI are also adding more jobs.
Hmm.
The thing about that is that they're adding more tech jobs, and that's sort of the growth area of the company. I just posted the research to LinkedIn, and they are hiring less on the kind of people graduating from school and more social studies or other departments. So we'll see how it goes. You're right. I think that harkens back to my comment about the fear. If you go, oh my God, it's going to take my job, let me hunker down and try to protect myself, that actually is going to work less well than going forward, because you're not competing with AI, or competing with a person who knows, say, generative AI more than you do if you're looking for a job. And
Yeah.
actually, I do have a competency framework on future skills. And I think it's almost more like a future state of being than necessarily the skills. But over time, since I did my book, which was about experiment, reinvent, collaborate, and focus. Those were some of the key skills
Hmm.
that people needed to embrace. But then in our, I'm on cohort 13 of the FutureProof course, and we've distilled what people need into the ability to do the future scanning, and understand what's coming. Sort of Wayne Gretzky, you can skate to where the puck is as opposed to where it's been.
Right.
The ability to understand your own purpose and values, and process of reflecting on that. And we do something that's a why operating system where people get to know what one of their 9 archetypes are in terms of their purpose. Then there's the storytelling. I think that even in the companies that I talk to who are truly inventing the future, storytelling and communication is the key aspect. Like if you're pioneering something completely new, you need to be able to tell a story about it that gets people excited and on board, either internal employees or external. And then there's the adaptability element where you can really understand when and where to change, and not be really stuck in your ways. And then there's community and network. So do you form relationships with people that allow you to get the right feedback? Or do you just have the AI chatbot perpetually give you feedback? That's who knows? Maybe that's possible. Um,
Well,
in
now
fact,
now some of these chatbots, you can just talk to them
but
with,
do you know why? The reason that they're collecting so much data is because you're training the models.
yeah,
That's why.
yeah.
The same reason that you have to click on a motorcycle every time you want to prove you're a human, because you're training the model to, for on image recognition.
Yeah, yeah.
So kind of dystopian thinking we're just all sitting here training the machine. But it is.
Well, yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling. Tell me a little bit about the whole stories thing, the necessity of telling stories, and how does that look, and can you give us an example?
Yeah. So on a basic level, I find for individuals that navigating disruption, and their careers inside a company, they need to be able to articulate their value. Because, maybe you don't have a career for 40 years. So what helps a company is if every single person in their organization can say, these are some of my skills and experiences. This is what I'm good at. And this is how I would like to apply my skills. So we start with that narrative. I think that if you know your values, like my values and my desire is to find better ways to work on a fundamental level. I care about growth and I care about community. And so being able to go into a project, because now, in companies, people are forming projects all the time. We talked about the hackathons or the innovation processes. You have your business as usual job, but then you're also building things, perpetually. So for me to be able to come in and say, I can contribute because I can help you find better ways to work. And I'm always looking for the better way. And somebody else can come in and say, you know what? My superpower is simplifying things. So how can I be part of the process where I simplify things? So that's an individual level and how people are coming together around projects within companies. And that is a more innovation-led way to go forward. I think that that's part of the way we're going from the big org chart to just teams as a unit. And Hire in China has pioneered this with their Rendan Hui model, which is they just have little companies that kind of roll up. And
Hmm.
Rita McGrath is pioneering this with her permissionless organization. So that's one of the reasons that storytelling is important on an individual level. In terms of the company, it's similar. It's like what we talked about, strategic foresight. What is that big vision that we can align around? And how do we talk to people about, the big thing we're trying to accomplish? So for this company, Reap Financial, they are rethinking how people can access financial markets. So externally, they need to get good at the story of why they get up in the morning, and for their customers, why it is that they're fighting the good fight to transform the way that people can access their money. So they, for instance, pioneered credit cards that crypto companies and blockchain companies can issue to their clients, which has never been done before. So they need to tell that story. But what we worked on, which was interesting, is figuring out who you're speaking to and telling the story of why it's important. And the typical arc of having an inciting incident and saying, this happened and that's why change is required. This happened and here's what's possible now. And if we do this, it's going to be amazing. And if we don't do this, it's going to be terrible. And, this is why you're the hero and you need to help me in terms of talking to teams, because there's a million priorities and a million things you can do. But having the storytelling and influence to create change where there's very little process in place in new companies or for new projects is a huge skill.
How does culture fit into all of this? I mean, you're working in China, in Hong Kong. I'm in the US. We have different ideas about work and hierarchies and who's the boss. And, I've hardly had a boss my whole career. I've been on my own since high school. So, just the thought of a boss gives me the willies, because I like to create stuff. I like to think things up and et cetera, et cetera. So how does that work for you working in China with companies? And is it easier? Is it, we hear the thing always, I'm hearing this on the news in China. China wants to build a steel plant. The next day, a freaking steel plant is built. In the U.S., we have 27 zillion approvals and environmental things. And maybe some of that stuff is necessary, of course, but things happen faster in China in many, many ways. So, what have you found in terms culturally, what that's been like?
Well, I have been in Hong Kong for the better part of 25 years, and I've worked across Asia. And I think that, so in a way, I'm not sure, my understanding of the way things work in the US is going to be as deep even. What I think in my observation is Asia's a bit like Europe. Like we understand culture because we're a collection of a bunch of different countries. So when I'm in, my whole career, I've had a team where there's been people all over Asia, and I've had to, and mostly bosses in the UK or US, right? So I need to know what the story is in the Philippines that's different from the story in Australia, that's different from the story in China. And that makes us more flexible, I think, those who are working regionally, like me, and more culturally sensitive in some respects. Like you do need to change the message. People work differently in every single country. There's different regulations, etc. And that slows things down. I think that the in certain places with certain people, you can get things done quickly, if that is what has been focused on. I think that to a certain extent, um, there's a little propaganda around, how fast things happen. Um, but in Singapore, for instance, where it's a small city state, it's, there's a lot of, um, in my, view, top-down, government-led initiatives. Yeah, they're like, this is what we're doing, and everybody get in line, and the regulations will all line up so that everybody's doing what we want to have happen. And
Mm.
yes, that's fabulous in the sense of getting things done. Um, but there is bureaucracy that comes along with that, which is, if you want to do anything any differently, then it's very difficult. So one of my
Right.
clients yesterday in Singapore was saying, oh, it's great. We've been endorsed by Skills Future Singapore, which is a government-led initiative that you hear about where, they're subsidizing everybody in the country to learn AI. But they were saying, it's great. So we're certified, but that means that actually we can't change our prices. That's part of the regulation. We can't change our prices for this program.
Mm.
And I was thinking, oh, that's not very flexible. It sort of flies in the face of the agility you would expect.
Yeah.
So if you look under the hood, I think, yeah, absolutely. In a place that's where the government has a lot of power, things can go quickly when they need to.
Yeah.
But there are downsides to that too.
Right. So what's the next thing companies and individuals have to consider regarding creating a new future, moving into the future, and future-proofing their business?
The next thing that they need to think about is, I would say, the strategic foresight piece. This is something that I've done for 8 years, and companies are very, 8 years ago, they were saying, this future stuff is ridiculous. Like, it's fanciful. It's, we'll just do our strategic plan and we have to double down on business as usual and whatnot. And now I'm seeing this phenomenal resurgence of interest where people are going, oh yeah, wait a minute. We get that without like thinking about the scenarios and planning the scenarios, that we don't have as good an idea and we're not prepared for what's ahead. And so, it's not something that's super new. Strategic foresight is basically futures thinking plus strategy. I think that we've been really focused on the strategy part, and the futures part is the one that I'm finding companies turning onto in spades. They're going, okay, if we do a bunch of scenarios, and COVID is part of this, they're like, nobody did the scenario where we actually thought about what happens when we have a pandemic. I think only 20% of any of the filings for big listed companies in the US even mention the possibility of that kind of disruption. But now you see companies that are going, okay, big and small, right? We should be doing this for our companies and saying, okay, in 10 years, what are the possibilities? And what are the different scenarios that we have? And how can we, mitigate the risk and embrace the opportunity? And I'm doing that with boards now. I'm doing it with companies. I'm really excited because, frankly, I've been really interested and I've seen the value in it. But before the pandemic, nobody really cared. They were just business as usual and
Yeah.
maybe a little sizzle, but
Interesting. Well, are you involved in any initiatives to address the impacts of global warming, climate change? We're having one of the biggest, hottest summers of all time. We've had 110 temperatures in the U.S. in the past week. We've been
Mhm.
spared it here in California, which is kind of nice. But in the Midwest, I don't know what it's like in China. But, I often think, as someone who has no control over any of that, I'm kind of a victim of what the big governments figure out. You just get a sense that people aren't thinking big enough, and a lot of people, especially if you're on the right side of the political spectrum, it's like there's climate change denialism. It's like, oh, it's not happening. The sea really isn't rising, and all these things, and windmills are terrible or whatever. Um, so, what are your thoughts on that? Because it seems to me that that's the work of the future. If we don't figure something out, we ain't going to survive. We're going to see mass starvation. We're going to see some bad stuff.
You are really dooming, dooming and glooming, Robert. You're like,
Well, hey, I
there's going
think
to be a
I
big machine, and we're all going to work for the machine, and we're going to have mass starvation. And like, if
well,
you've ever read the Ministry of the Future novel, then that actually is how they open up, with a heat wave that's so bad that people go into the sea and they get boiled. It's really, really shocking.
more than 1,000 people were killed during the Mecca pilgrimage of the Hajj. I don't know if you heard that. 1,300 people died,
Yeah.
and part that was poor planning for several reasons. They could have mitigated it, but
There you go. There we go with the scenario planning. So,
yeah,
really, I think that because I do a lot of future work, people go, oh, that's tech. But, as we sort of started the conversation around it, it is about big trends. It is about, the change in demographics. It's for sure climate change. And the process of doing scenario planning that says, okay, let's say we think about the Hajj. Okay, what are all the possibilities for us in a couple of years? What if, the Islamic population is growing? The different demographic changes are happening. You can see it in education, where it's like, oh, primary schools, we don't need so many of them. And education is changing. Like,
right, right,
there are a lot of big institutions that are doing this kind of futures work right now, where they really are saying, here are all the different scenarios. How can we plan for that? How can we plan to make it the best possible? And so for sustainability, that is one of the big disruptors. Sustainability, demographics, technology, those are the big trends that people are planning the scenarios around. And so this process works for that too. And I take
hmm,
companies on a similar process. Maybe sustainability is one of the factors. So one of the companies here that's listed is growing at 1%. They make an acquisition, they're thinking about their big vision. Part of their big vision is to be one of the top most sustainable companies in their sector. And then how can they do that? Via, the changes in their processes, the behaviors, the mindsets, collaborations with other people. And we brainstorm and innovate around that. And then sort of talk about, okay, great. So how do we do that? What do we have to stop doing in order to ensure that that is the right thing to do? And I think for climate change, the thing that is difficult is that it's often not something that individuals can do alone or a company can do alone. It requires partnerships and collaborations and some,
yeah,
strategic collaboration and governments, et cetera.
big time.
Yeah.
I see the news. I'm concerned about a lot of these things. Plastic waste, for instance, single-use plastic bottles. The statistics about it are just insane. We produce all this waste that we can't do anything with it. Not all of it's recyclable or breaks down into microplastics. We're now finding microplastics in our body. That's not going to be a
Yeah.
problem, is it? I mean, geez. So,
Well, there's a lot of work to do, and
yeah, really.
some of the biggest problems in the world, I think, are some of the biggest opportunities for us to do great work. So,
Yeah.
um,
I mean,
on
that's the
that
way to
note, I
look at
don't
it.
think we'll all be sitting around unemployed because we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. So, to sort of wrap this up, if you would say, for the average worker looking into the future, what are the key things they've got to do to future-proof their careers and their companies for more sustainability and a better world?
Understanding what the skills are that you need to navigate the future and having agency over your career and learning is applicable at any level.
Hmm.
So, understanding where your industry is headed on a basic level, keeping up with that future oriented news, understanding your own value and where you can contribute, and getting good at that narrative and network piece to be able to add that value, to be able to say, hey, I can help you navigate the future and navigate disruption, and having a network of people so that they know that I'm available and can be helpful in that way, is a completely new way to navigate your career. But I think that everybody, entrepreneur, retiree, big company, small company, that is this new way to go forward, that allows us to be flexible and form around the problems we need to solve.
Sounds hopeful. I
I am an optimist, absolutely.
I
An
mentioned
urgent optimist. We need to get busy in order to
yes.
create the world that we want to see.
I mentioned to a lot of people I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I watch Star Trek every evening. I'm going back to the old shows and watching one show a night, and it presents a future where it's pretty gigantic. We're travel to the stars. That probably isn't going to happen given the realistic of warp technology. I don't think that's going to happen. But it shows that there we can if we can think that kind of future, a future where people are cooperating and getting along, and there are no more wars. I mean, I think we're a long way from it, but um,
It is the most optimistic science fiction I think around, so that I can see
yeah,
why you would go back to that.
yeah. Well, it nourishes me. Everything in it is about trying to make things work in very difficult situations. I mean, they're fighting some, unimaginable horror in outer space that they have to figure out. There's a whole season about that. This thing that was moving through the universe, killing planets. But it's kind of
Hate when
a
that happens.
I hate when that happens. It's a very good series, but all of that is kind of an analogy to what is happening today. We've got ridiculous amounts of pollution, and all of these kinds of things, and they take the bull by the horns and apply ridiculously complex levels of AI and intelligence to try to figure the heck out what it is. Really interesting. Anyway, so it keeps me inspired. So, can you grab your book?
Oh, yeah.
So here's the book. You can
Here's
get
the
it on
book.
Amazon, I assume.
Yep, it's on Amazon, and you can download it from my website, futureprooflab.com. And actually, because not everybody's, you can get it on Audible and listen to me read it.
Oh, great.
But not everybody is a book person. I understand that. And so we also on our website have 11 questions to help you navigate the future.
Oh, great.
So
Great.
if you download that, I think people, it's like a nice way to start where you go, oh, the future, it's really anxious. And it is, 11 questions that ask you about the kind of network you have and the people in your life and, the progress that you make and your forward thinking. And then you can fill in the gaps from there.
Yeah. Diane, it was really fun talking to you about this. It really is expanding my thinking about the future. And it fits right in with Ordinary Visionaries, of course, because that is about what's the vision for the future to make a difference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. It's always wonderful to speak to you.